My name is Dr. G, Dr. Ehsan Garajadaki. I'm a clinical psychologist, founder of Therapy Cable, and we have received some good questions. Usually, what we do, we cover information about therapy, personality disorders, psychology. So, last time we got about like 6 questions. We answered 3 of them already. We're going to continue with these questions. So, Kathy, thank you for posting your question, Kathy. Kathy asks, I'm a disabled veteran diagnosed with PTSD, acute depression, bipolar personality disorder tendencies. I've been to therapy for 20 years and it's mostly worked for wartime issues. But how can I approach BPD or borderline personality disorder? It seems I'm fixing everything except BPD. So this address. So, well, Kathy, I think that is you are kind of on your way of addressing the BPD as well, because if you have worked on depression and PTSD, that means most likely have worked on concepts, constructs, phenomena that are at the very much the core commonality between symptoms that exist in multiple different disorders and diagnoses. And in this case, between PTSD, depression, and borderline personality. So let's talk a little bit about that and then also make further recommendations and suggestions. So some of the similarities, if you will, is the idea that at the core commonality here between these 3, we have mood problem or mood disorder. So we're dealing with emotional dysregulation. So, for instance, depression, right? It's more of a depressed and helpless, hopeless, fatigued sense of emotion taking over our both biochemistry, physiology, and mental status, to a point that we become debilitated and, in fact, make wrong decisions, perhaps jump to conclusions and wrong judgments, and engage in behaviors and activities that are more or less naturally designed to reduce our pain. As I mentioned, including those symptoms of helplessness, hopelessness, fatigue, and being depressed, having a low mood, and these activities at times actually fire back. They kind of work their way against us. The consequences that we have to live due to having engaged in some kind of a behavior that, in order to reduce our pain, on the long-term basis may add more pain, because consequences ultimately are more negative, more dysfunctional, more debilitating. So this aspect of mood dysregulation due to depression is very much close to the aspect of mood dysregulation due to trauma. For instance, for someone who has experienced PTSD, someone who has been going to war and seen atrocious events and witnessed extreme pain, traumatic events that really pull at our psyche and our identity and our capacity of even existing as a human being, because of the disastrous nature of these events, where we are being challenged to the core and to the extreme extent that is humanly possible. These events ultimately leave a scar, and the scars tend to affect our sensation, perception, and feelings even after the traumatic event. So down the road, the person has, let's say, been to war, even the war is over, even though that they may have left the war scene for years, they continue experiencing sensations in their body. They have dreams, they have flashbacks, they have intrusive thought, and a combination of thoughts and feelings. For instance, becoming completely, utterly depressed out of nowhere, or anxious, extremely alerted and startled and panicky at other times. And so those are also very much mood-related fluctuations that a person has to deal with. Feeling afraid, and having to avoid certain situations, interactions, just because of the possibility of an ensuing fear, panic attack, and again flashbacks that are extremely painful. And what we mean by pain is that there is an associated mood experience with it, such as, again, disappointed, feeling betrayal, feeling utterly hopeless, helpless, agitated, frustrated, angry, and in fact, at times even dissociating and having completely out of this work experiences that we generally know as more psychotic experiences, dissociation, depersonalization, derealization. Any of those challenging feeling experiences, they have also extremely painful feelings associated with it, and a state of dysregulation that basically overwhelms the body, our system, our psyche. And a person who is experiencing PTSD literally cannot control them, feels helpless and helpless toward them, and feels utterly, I would say, kind of almost like a victim to these intrusive events and episodes that are happening to them. So with the core concept, again, very much similarly, a state of dysregulation of their feeling. And then BPD, one of the hallmarks of BPD is emotional dysregulation, especially as it relates to the concept or phenomenon of attachment, being accepted, getting approval, versus being rejected and being abandoned and disapproved of. So again, this type of a possibility in terms of that fear of rejection or abandonment immediately leads to triggering that emotional intensity in a person, and the intense experience of being overwhelmed with this literally and seemingly eternal and eternally debilitating feelings, such as, again, hopelessness, helplessness, exhaustion, and feelings of betrayal, loneliness. Ultimately, we can boil down and kind of, narrow down all kinds of multiple, perhaps hundreds or thousands of emotional or affective feelings into very few that are becoming more primary and core set of emotions that are that build the building blocks of every other emotion, and the most painful, which would include like joy or sadness or fear or loneliness or some perhaps a sort of agitation, a state of being highly agitated and feeling some kind of irritation and frustration, a sense of frustration. Being frustrated itself is a sensation that people can be overcome by. And on these core emotions that we talked about, primary core emotions are very much common between these three, generally disorders. One of them, the personality disorder, borderline; the other one, more of an anxiety disorder, the PTSD; and the other one, the mood disorder, the major depression. So, if you have already worked on the PTSD and depression, there are components that you have learned in terms of being able to regulate your feelings and such as, avoiding certain situations, flashbacks that you may have had, feeling fatigued or hopeless, helpless. And so those strategies, techniques, and tactics that you have learned, they can come in handy in dealing with the borderline personality. So ultimately, if you can exercise and practice and fine-tune those skills you have learned to deal with those mood fluctuations, you can apply those in those situations where the borderline characteristics are being triggered and come to the surface. So it really just takes a focused, intentional strategy, like guiding your attention toward practicing, implementing the learned skills that you already have obtained through therapy for PTSD and major depression. Remember that, okay, if I am feeling completely and utterly betrayed or disappointed by something that a partner or a co-worker or somebody that I have a relationship with engaged in, then what have I learned or that I can do, engage in right now, that I can, as far as the coping skills is concerned, what have I learned that I can apply now to this situation and see the situation as more realistic rather than completely hopeless. So help yourself apply the skills to the black and white nature of this particular disorder or the tendencies or characteristics that you're experiencing. Yourself that if I engage in this all or none thinking, black and white thinking, dichotomous good and bad thinking, it's not in my benefit. It's going to make me more agitated and frustrated. It's going to make me feel more depressed. So, common sense, really, especially kind of concluding your own training and learning skills, coping skills that you have learned, dictate that you're much better off implementing more constructive approaches toward perceiving a situation and interpreting a situation that ultimately pays off and are in your favor and benefit. So rather than allowing situations to dictate the way you feel about them, you can remind yourself that feelings can change from moment to moment. They can be under your control. They are more or less like waves that wane and wax and basically fluctuate. At times it may be very intense, and at times it's going to go away and dissipate like they didn't exist. And in fact, feeling triggered by a lot of stimuli, positive feelings and good feelings, joyful feelings that you would want to experience are created by certain thought, certain kind of attention, if you will, memories that can come up. So you can engage in those types of memories, reminding yourself of the good times, of the times you have been strong and secure, and times that you have had similar situations but survived them. You have, moved away and above and beyond that type of situation that was first making you weak and vulnerable. If you have had those experiences in the past, that can remind you that this is one of those similar situations. And just because I'm disagreeing with this person, we may have completely, utterly disappointing disagreements, and it can be insulting. It can be devastating. It can be almost crossing boundaries and borders, basically borders and boundaries. And however, I'm not going to allow, you know, the event more or less to dictate how I feel beyond the moment. So yes, I can. I was angry. I am angry, or I was angry for that situation, in that situation, and it was called for. I felt insulted, etc. But that was that situation, and that situation has ended. So today, I got to live for the situation that exists today, right now, around me. So let me focus my attention toward the reality around me that is full of reasons to feel different, such as there are tons of other things that are going on in my life beyond that particular event that has happened in a certain relationship a few hours ago, a few days ago. There are tons of other relationships that are important. There are tons of other tasks that are important. There are perhaps a number of issues and tasks that are even more important than those that spat or disagreement that I had with this partner. So this constant reminder about the reality of life, that life is multifaceted. Does not have to be and should not be consumed just by one event, by one disagreement or inaction. It's much richer, and it deserves a lot more attention. Multiple aspects of our lives are equally important, equally deserving of our attention, of our feelings, of our time expenditure, investment. We remind ourselves constantly of that reality that ultimately is the most important part of our life. Then we can continue living in the moment of here and now, rather than in the past or in the future. So that's that answer to the borderline personality disorder. We're going to continue with the next question, which is Dawn is asking, how can you stop being a codependent and a perfectionist? Very good question. So these are two different things. So one is being codependent, the other one is being a perfectionist. So let's tackle one at a time. So codependency is literally a need and necessity at times for a person who has not fully developed their own identity, their own existence, their own the unit of the mind, physiology, psychology, spirituality that they call them, I, the me of themselves. They haven't fully developed it. It hasn't matured enough. It hasn't become fully self-differentiated. So therefore, what happens is that part of that's why I use the word identity, is because really the way they experience the world around them, literally is encapsulated within this concept of identifying themselves, who they are, within this environment that they live in. So this kind of psychological boundary and psychological skin around the person that I am. We can call it persona, we can call it personality, we can call it self. But this concept of this entity, this unity that I embody and take with me and live with constantly. I go to bed with myself basically every night. I get up being myself every morning, live through life experiencing me as myself. Now, all that is encapsulated in generally one label or term called identity. So this identity it actually develops over time. So it's not something we're born with immediately. It is something that we develop, and there are multiple layers and components of the identity that have to develop at different times, different stages from birth all the way to until we die. It's never fully 100% complete. So it's always a work in progress. Now, and as such, also at different stages and in different phases, it lives in dependency with its environment. Now, that level of dependency can be determined and fine-tuned and also described. And so when we use the word codependency, what you're doing is that you're describing that level of interaction and dependency of that self-identity with the environment. The goal generally is that a healthy person with a healthy identity ultimately arrives at a level of what we call higher self-differentiation, meaning that they can more or less exist quite independently, not 100% independent from their environment, because then again that is literally almost impossible unless there's a recluse that goes to the remote island and literally cuts off every contact with the world and can survive by themselves. So all they need is basically food and hygiene, more or less, and hopefully no medical condition comes up, that no ailment comes up. But if they don't have any diseases and disorders, generally as long as they have shelter, food, they can survive by themselves. But then the question remains, like, what kind of is that a meaningful life that they're living? And maybe there is for a fraction of society, but for the majority, perhaps 99.9% of human population, seems that generally people prefer to live within a society and with full of interactions with their environment and the society. And those actions ultimately are part of that dependency that we talked about. So within the level of dependency, if a person can achieve a very highly functional independence to a point that they can take care of most of their needs and desires and wishes simply by themselves. And at times when they cannot take care of those needs by themselves, but they do need to be in interaction with everybody else, that they do so with a very well negotiated and mutually beneficial and reciprocally kind of fair and a win-win type of a proposition. If they can, they have self-differentiated themselves to the point where there is a level of respect and appreciation and gratitude for, and again, more advanced level of maturity and development in terms of being both oneself as an individual as well as belonging to community, society, being able to interact with other members of the society, and again, as I mentioned, have that level of gratitude, appreciation, and respect to a point that one can literally come to terms and accept the true concept of diversity, and that is defined as someone who basically can be different than others. Okay, they can be themselves, their unique self, and they have equal rights to everybody else who also are different and uniquely, exist in a very. Each person exists in a very unique sense of self within this diverse world, and the interactions are healthy and not dysfunctional. So that brings us ultimately to the issue with codependency. So the reason the word codependency is being used is that it's meant to use as a dysfunctional level of interaction rather than interdependency, healthy dependency, and it's completely different than independence. So independent, we can use that as an adjective to basically describe a state of quality for a person's, let's say, way of thinking and opinion, or even living standard that is that is um, contained, I would say, by parameters that are self-serving for the individual, but also approved of, respected by others. So a person can be, let's say, independent. They pay their own living. They rather than relying heavily on family members to support them financially. They can be independent emotionally by taking care of their emotions and feelings by themselves, and rather than heavily depending on other people to take care of these emotions for them. They can be independent in terms of their hygiene and grooming and self-care without heavily depending on others. And that's kind of the very delicate line to cross when we say heavily dependent. What is a little bit dependent versus heavily dependent? So let's say if I as part of my self-care, and I go to the gym, to a sauna, and take care of myself, I use other people's services. I pay for these services, and there is that need of that reciprocity and mutually acceptable and win-win situation. So there is a tacit agreement that if I go to a place that's to work out, or get a massage, or go to sauna and work, or a gym, or wherever it is, as part of my self-care, I'm for these services. There are individuals who are there that I technically am depending on to provide these services, and they're being paid for these services. So there is that mutual win-win situation where both entities arrive at this gratification in the end, that okay, the gym got membership, they're fine, they can pay their electricity, their employees, their equipment, repair, maintenance, you name it, and I'm happy because I could work out and relax a little bit, and then basically spend a couple of hours of physical self-care. Now that would be more of a healthy dependency on each other, versus a codependent relationship, for instance, would be something like where too much burden on another person's time investment, expenditure. I get the benefits, but they don't, and also the relationship becomes very contingent and conditional on one another. So an example would be, I will multiple examples, especially when it comes to emotional codependency. But before we go there, physical codependency, in this case, very similar to the gym, is like if basically I am not paying for certain services that I use, and I go to some places for, let's say, free, or just because I know a person, kind of sneaky. Maybe I have arranged some kind of a situation where I'm manipulating a person into allowing me to use their gym membership. That's it's a little bit of an unhealthy dependency on one another, and but it becomes very clear. It's in terms of emotionality and a sense of trading one's feelings and happiness, or regulation of feelings, with the behavior of others. An example of that is when people, especially spouses or family members, make their own, let's say, state of mind and state of mood, like I mentioned, happiness, joy, sadness, and the reason to change that type of a mood and emotional experience they make it conditional on the behavior of the people that they are involved with. To give an example, a person may constantly state that they are angry and upset and sad if their partner, hangs out with a certain crowd or engages in a certain business activity. Now, in general, that may sound kind of normal to a lot of people. That in general, a lot of individuals may say, well, let's say a spouse may be listening to me and then think, well, if my partner goes out with the wrong crowd, let's say if they go drinking and gambling every night with his friends, then I have the right, I should be making my feelings and my state of mind and state of happiness and gratification within my relationship conditional. I should be using that as a leverage. I should be at least expressing it to my partner. And then if you ask them, well, why should you be, what benefit does it serve? Yes, you should be able to express your opinion for sure and how you feel. However, what benefit does it serve? Like if you say to your partner, if you go and hang out with this crowd, I'm happy, and in order to make me, I'm unhappy, and if in order to make me happy, I want you to stop hanging out with this crowd. What benefit does it serve? Ultimately, if you think about it, the benefit that it serves is to really kind of keep the relationship alive, to keep the relationship going. It doesn't have any other benefit. For the person who is making this condition, they are doing it because if it didn't happen, if the partner didn't stop hanging out with the wrong crowd, and the displeasure of the first partner is continuing, ultimately the relationship would not be worth their time. So they would want to separate themselves. But why don't they separate themselves from the very beginning to start? That's the main question. I would have that question. I would ask, well, why don't you want to separate from this person if you don't agree with the way they do things? Wouldn't you be better off to just kind of leave or tell them that we don't match, we don't get along. You like a different crowd. I like a different crowd. You like different activities than I do. So we are not made for each other. Let's just separate. Let's just go our own ways. So, that would be more of a self-differentiated response. That would be something that literally based on some observations, a person may come to that conclusion and decide to go separately. So, interestingly and paradoxically, this proposition is counterintuitive, meaning that people generally have hopes that despite these differences, they can negotiate a compromise. They generally, people have part of our upbringing, nature, culture, teachings that we have received that it's regarded as a virtue to not completely give up a relationship on your partner just because some differences in opinions, and which is true as well. So, and here is where it becomes kind of murky and kind of vague and diffuse, because it's hard to tell, in terms of which way do we want to go. Do we want to rely on this age-old kind of proven teachings that these differences in opinions and lifestyles and preferences within relationships, we should negotiate and come to a compromise, and by wanting to do so, we would have to more or less express our feelings and opinions, but also literally make our beyond just making our feelings known, we would also have to make them contingent, right? Because it's not like a partner would say, okay, you know what, I'm really unhappy that you hang out with this crowd and drink every night. So I just wanted to let you know that I'm unhappy, but you can go ahead and continue doing what you're doing. That's not realistic. That's not pragmatic. That's not practical. That's not reality. That's not what's happening. What's happening is that people not only express their displeasure, but also they demand something in return. So they usually a expression of displeasure is followed by a demand, because nobody wants to remain in discomfort. So ultimately, partner says, "Hey, I don't like this, and by the way, I have a demand, whether it is tacitly expressed, verbally, non-verbally, openly expressed or not. But the demand is that you stop doing what you're doing, so I feel better." So at times it works. Many times it works. Generally, there are negotiable actions and behavior preferences. Then at times it doesn't work. And that's where we cross that line between a strategy and an approach of negotiating preferences that are generally malleable, applicable, pliable, and um, negotiable, and to a point that it becomes unhealthy. It becomes really manipulative in nature, and that's where the codependency, unhealthy level of codependency, wreaks more havoc in relationships than doing any good. So as if a person more or less basically is faced with an adamant either denial or rejection of that demand. So let's say a partner says, "I don't want you to go out and hang out with this crowd and drink so much, come home every night drunk, and da, da, da." And a couple of times their partner complies, but then after a while they say, "Well, screw this, I'm going to do whatever I want." And so now we are at the stalemate, but there are situations that these can escalate into further exacerbation of the problem, and yet the partner doesn't call it quits, doesn't leave, doesn't draw a line. So if the negotiation, that's really the bottom line, if the negotiation around these preferences don't work, so the communication and discussion has not led to a mutually agreeable solution and resolution of the problem, then we have to draw a line. So we have to, the partner literally unrealistically has to consider separation from this agreement that is called a relationship. So because there's the benefits of the relationships are outweighed by the disadvantages of the relationship. So based on this new set reality that a partner may experience, they have to honor their own sense of self and their own preferences as well, and basically come to an acceptance that their partner is quite adamant about asserting their own needs and preferences, and they're not willing to meet them halfway, they're not willing to compromise. Now, if that didn't happen, if this partner continued, making these threats, making these demands, and then going even further as to coming up with new strategies to almost, kind of take revenge and manipulate the relationship from a different perspective in order to get what they want. That is where we're stepping into high levels of dysfunctional codependency. So this person who is making their own feelings so contingent on the behaviors of the partner at the expense of not even considering healthier options, such as simple, respect of differences to a point of separation of, goals and journeys, then they're kind of stuck in that rut that they can't get out of. So that's the level of, that's the true intensity, if you will, of the codependency, meaning that they're so highly codependent on each other, even though the dysfunction is existent, even though they're quite entrenched in these contingent propositions on one another, and they can't even see through this jungle, if you will, of conditionality between them, of highly manipulative actions and behaviors toward each other, to just feel a little bit better. Because and that's really what keeps them in there, because due to inconsistency of inactions and behaviors, one partner or the other literally at times they give in to these threats of conditionality, and they kind of escalate to this level. At times it's just to make a threat, but at times it is seriously considered that the partner may leave. So I better get my act together. And so they show some sign of recourse and negotiation, compromise, but then that don't fully mean it. So the codependency can continue. So in this case, and that's why it was so hard and really long drawn answer to the aspect of codependency, because codependency is extremely complex, difficult to solve. But that's the depth of nature of that codependence, of that complexity and difficulty. That's why it's so hard to resolve, because there's so many layers of deep psychological principles, needs, expectations, preferences, and simple, I would say, bonding related bond between two people, part of the level of attachment, part of the level of the need to belong and not be alone, and feel lonely in this world, and feel a sense of meaningfulness and kind of shared experience. This sense of shared experience is highly seductive and almost trumps every other need, and we are willing to put up with a lot of pain with other types of voids that we may experience in life, in terms of not having our other needs met in order to just not be lonely and experience some kind of a shared phenomenology, or the way we experience this world, uniquely experience this world. The next question, we have another 12 minutes. So next question was about perfectionism. So let's see what specifically that was. So how can you stop being a perfectionist? So I'm not sure if I actually answered how to stop being codependent. I kind of explained the whole concept, but then I was intrinsically, tacitly explaining the solution, but let me just open and explicitly state that as well. So before we move on to perfectionist. So still staying at the codependent question. So stop being codependent. How can we do that? How can we stop part of our psyche and experience in this world that is so involved and entangled and entrenched with other people's experiences, needs, desires, memories. So if we have become so familiar and familiarized and with another person, whereas basically our identity is now entangled with their identity, so how can we stop being dysfunctional in terms of the level of codependency within that relationship? Well, in order to do so, we really have to develop a couple of things, a few things if we don't have them. Number one, I would say communication skills. And by communication, I don't mean talking to someone and telling someone and yelling at someone, or just hearing someone. Communication and arguing and debating also are very low levels of communication. So we really have to learn how to develop advanced level of listening and communicating, meaning relaying messages to our partners to the point that we can be understood. And one of the best ways of doing that is developing skills of what we call a dialogue, especially an effective, intimate dialogue. Having a dialogue requires specific skills. There's many traps on the way to developing meaningful understanding dialogue with another. It's a journey that is full of traps, and the traps are related to a lot of just general traditional things that we have learned about how people talk. We have so far, based on empirical research, identified 21 different obstacles and traps toward establishing a good dialogue. So it's not easy. And that's why most people are actually, they either don't know or shy away, even if they do know, shy away from wanting to even develop a dialogue with one another. But that's one of the key characteristics that would help a person develop a different level of relationship with one another that is less codependent, more self-differentiated, more independent, more healthily interdependent. And the other thing I would say that the person needs to develop is self-care. And again, that's part of that self-differentiation. So people who take care of themselves individually, not at the expense of others, but literally by themselves, in and of themselves and by themselves, have a sense of time, space, and certainly investment, expenditure, whether it's monetarily or otherwise, that relates to first being themselves, first being a human being, a functional human being. That can include setting time aside for some quiet time by themselves, noisy time by themselves, but sometimes some alone time. And that's different than being lonely. See, being alone can be quite healthy, can be good, and people just really kind of an intimate time with themselves that belongs to them, has and safeguards privacy. So everybody can enjoy their own privacy and need their own privacy, as well as, in terms of physical privacy. So time, location, space, activities, self-care related actions, behaviors that we engage in, such as, again, hygiene, sleep, diet, workout, fun activities, educational activities, interactional, such as games, etc. So all of those should be a part of the inventory of a person to at least spend, I would say, minimum 2 hours, maybe more, 4 hours a day on those alone activities that relate to their own self-care. The more they do that, the stronger they are and the more resources they have to deal with interpersonal stress and interactional anxiety and stress and challenge. Because again, each interpersonal and relationship brings its own challenges due to the fact that two people who have to share a common thing, whatever it may be, such as they have to share time with one another, they have to share space, they have to share resources. Everything that we talked about would have to be shared if two people are doing it at the same time with each other. And so that's the second component that would lead to better, healthier interdependency rather than codependency. A sense of appreciation of diversity, of being different, recognizing that each human being is a unique embodiment of an existence that deserves its own space in this world, its own space and time, and focus and attention, and literally that sense of identity and phenomenology in this world. So that sense of appreciation can lead to a person to respect not only themselves but other people, and therefore have a better dialogue Therefore, appreciate the other person's spending time, self-care, taking care of themselves, and come to a very level-headed and equal level of coexisting together in this world where um, um, the interactions between two people become a lot more joyful and meaningful and productive and constructive, so that each person feels a lot empowered due to the relationship rather than less empowered due to this relationship. So if we start right there with those three things, learning how to communicate better and having dialogue specifically as compared to dysfunctional debate and argument, doing self-care and appreciating diversity, three things can be huge in terms of helping a person develop the skills to move away from codependency and toward healthy interdependence and self-differentiation. So now, lastly, so now we're at about 5:56, so about only 4 minutes left. So how to stop being perfectionist? So I think that by itself deserves its own live section. Don't want to rush in 4 minutes through a list of ideas about perfectionism. So thank you very much. I want to thank again a lot of people who have posted questions, from Don, Paid Enthusiast, James, Kathy, Josh, and Austin. Thank you, everybody, from really, from Therapy Cable, from myself, for posting these questions. We are here live every Thursday, 5 p.m., 5-ish p.m. At times we have technical difficulties and start a little bit later, Pacific Standard Time. And we look forward to seeing you again on Therapy Cable channel, on Facebook, and Instagram. Join us again next time, next Thursday, and that's the 28th. Still between two holidays, Christmas and New Year, but we'll be there for you, 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Thank you, and have a nice evening. Bye-bye.